Greetings, everyone. This is Christopher Messina coming at you from the Messy Time Studios. It is a beautiful, crisp day here in Florida on the 24th of January. It's down around 50, which is negative 30 for Floridians. I'm delighted to have with me in the studio today Jeremy Hyman, who's not only a classmate of mine from the University of Chicago, but is a professor of biology or ornithology at Western Carolina University. I have that right?
Almost. That's correct.
All right. Well, Jeremy, thanks so much for joining us today. How are you?
Pretty good. How about you?
Fantastic. Fantastic.
Good.
So tell me a little bit about what's your subject area of expertise and what are you teaching?
Well, I am a evolutionary biologist. I primarily study birds, and my expertise, I guess, is bird behavior. And I mostly study territorial behavior in birds or communication.
So we've come a long way since Darwin's finches, is what you're telling me.
We have, yes.
So you've just published a book, right? Bird
Yes.
Talk, an exploration of avian communication, co-authored with Barbara Ballantyne, who I gather as a professor with you there. What is the main thing you found? What, in your studies, what prompted you to say this topic and what we've discovered is really worthy of a full book length coverage?
Well, so this book is really a review of the literature on bird communication, and there are lots of, or maybe not lots, but there are multiple bird books on bird song. There are books on bird plumage, but there really wasn't a current book on bird communication as a whole, thinking about all the different avenues that birds use to communicate with each other. So song, plumage, dances, all those kinds of things. So this book is a compendium of a review of the literature on all those topics and all the kinds of things that birds communicate about. So, for example, not just trying to find a mate, but parents trying to recognize offspring, trying to give signals that danger is around, all of the different kinds of things that birds communicate about.
Huh. And is there, across species and regions, are there some birds that are kind of more socially communicative than others, and some have much more simple grammars, if you will?
Yeah, there's a lot of variation. So the most complex communication systems tend to be in species that are very social. They have more interactions, more individuals that they get to know as individuals, and I guess you could say more to talk about if you have more individuals that you can possibly be talking to. So there's a group of birds known as the Chickadees and Tit Mice. In Europe, they're known as tits. And that's a group of birds that is very social. They live in family groups in the breeding season and big flocks in the wintertime. And they're a well-known group of birds for the complexity of their communication. So they're a group of birds that gets a lot of focus when it comes to studies of communication in birds.
And so in terms of comparisons between the utter nonsense that most of our species babbles on about all day long, ironically called Twitter,
right.
I would hope that birds have somewhat more substantive conversations. And more importantly, are there bird politicians that lie to other birds and do things incorrectly?
Well, it's funny that one of the things that we discuss in this book, there's an opening chapter that's really about the theory of animal communication before we really get around to talking about birds. And there's a long-standing question, especially when it comes to issues like males displaying for females and showing off their songs or their plumes. What is it that they're really showing to females? Why do females pay any attention? And for a good long while now, there's been one theory that's held sway the longest, which is that communication tends to be honest. It tends to reveal something about the quality or the motivations of the signaler. Because otherwise, why would anybody pay any attention to it? And so I think a lot about honesty in communication in humans. And one of the biggest questions that comes to my mind over and over again is, why are we so willing to listen to the same people lie over and over and over again, when theory tells us that you should give up on those lying people as soon as you've caught them out on a lie a few times. I think we tend to do that in our interpersonal relationships. You don't put up with lying colleagues or lying friends too many times. But sometimes, well, you mentioned politicians. Sometimes we put up with lying politicians for a lot longer.
Arguably 100% of the time. So
maybe.
and clearly there is something strange in the human genus, that we thrive in conditions of not uncertainty, but downright dishonesty.
Right.
And so clearly that's evolutionarily not disadvantageous to be a lying bag, which might not work so well as a crow.
Right. It seems that being a member of the social group is actually, in some cases, more important than the honesty of the message that you're getting. Or maybe in cases, the honesty of the message that you're getting doesn't really impact your day-to-day life quite in the same way.
Right.
As
at all.
Kinds of things that two chickadees might be talking about. So if one chickadee gives an alarm call that lets the group, or suggests to the group that there's a predator around, you can hide from that predator. And if they were lying, then you didn't really lose out on too much. You come back out and you start feeding again. If there really was a predator around and they lied and gave you the all clear, then you suffer quickly.
And you're out. Maybe, I mean, I'm sure you guys have looked at this a lot. You spend a lot more time on this than I do, but I studied anthropology, and the more I look at human behavior, the closer it gets to less than birds. So I don't like it. But maybe it has to do with the immediacy of the message, right? There is no, this $78 trillion bill is going to make us money in 28 years, the Congressional Budget Office says. That, believing that or not is kind of irrelevant. It's absurd. You can't test it. Whereas, jump out of the way right now, there's a cat. There's an immediate message. Lying about something immediate. That's why it's illegal to yell fire in a movie house, right? But you can stand up and yell climate change and it doesn't matter. Right? Because nothing's going to change your experience of this movie right now.
Right. No, I think there is something to be said about that. I mean, there are so many topics that humans discuss that are not immediate, and also topics that we discuss that are really beyond our comprehension. And so you take people's word for it a lot. I don't mean beyond our comprehension,
right?
Species, but if I'm listening to an economist talk, for example,
I don't believe the exact opposite, and you'll be on steady ground.
Well, if you listen to enough economists, you'll hear very intelligent people giving opposite opinions. So then, who are you going to believe?
Yeah. That was Harry Truman's great thing, right? He said, what do you really want for Christmas, Mr. President? He said, I want a one-armed economist. They said, why? Because every time they walk in here, they tell me this, and I'm about to do something, and they say, on the other hand. Sorry, I can't resist that.
Good quote. Yeah, so I think there's a lot more, I can't think of the right word. Bowing to authority when it comes to complex things that humans talk about.
What's the most kind
life is simpler.
Life is simpler. What is the most kind of surprising or innovative idea or finding in your field that has occurred since you began? Is it something that's like, wow, I really didn't see that, didn't expect that, but it fits because of why? Is there anything like that that's occurred?
Well, just talking about alarm calls, for example, that's one that's really caught people's attention because of the way it relates to human language. So the idea that an animal could produce one alarm call that means that there's a snake present, and another alarm call that means that there's a hawk present. There was a time, at least, when that was a pretty hard idea for some people to believe, that that animals had even that rudimentary a language. It was first described in vervet monkeys in the late 70s, that they had different acoustically distinct alarm calls, essentially different words for different predators. And then, there was a long gap of time before people described similar things in other animals, such as birds. So there's been a lot of research in the last 10 years or so on the ability of, essentially on the vocabulary of birds and what kind of syntax, what kind of words do they have, what kind of syntax matters, how close are they to having anything that resembles even a rudimentary language. So that's been a big topic for a while. Closer to the kinds of things that I studied for, or that I've done research on, I think a lot of people are surprised to learn that birds can recognize other individuals on the basis of their vocalizations. So males and females in a group or of a pair probably recognize each other on the basis of their vocalizations. Especially if they're in big flocks, they can recognize each other to keep track of individuals. A territorial male songbird, when it sings, it can recognize all of its neighbors on the basis of song to understand if everybody's in the right place and if there are intruders in the neighborhood and things like that. And then maybe more recently, people have started to pay a little bit more attention to individual variation in communication. In other words, some individuals might be much more aggressive than others when it comes to defending their territory, and that might be revealed in their songs in some way. When it comes to alarm calls, some individuals might be a lot more jumpy or scared, and they might give more alarm calls in a certain situation than another. And that means that you have to recognize the messenger a little bit to get the message. So that's something that I've been interested in working on for a while. I haven't really gotten that far with it.
So this may be a layman's interpretation, but I hear you telling me that Chicken Little is a documentary.
Pretty much, yeah.
That's awesome. I remember being blown away when I read Holdobler and Wilson's The Ants, right? About when they're showing the powerful communication patterns sociobiologically amongst insects.
Right.
Does that same model of communication translate into the avian world, or are they just convergent evolution and the way they communicate have nothing to do with each other?
Oh, I think they're pretty similar. I mean, I think the general rules that govern communication are probably true throughout all communicating animal species. Obviously ants use a lot of chemical communication. Birds are much less well known for chemical communication, although there is some evidence now that they do have olfactory senses and can smell each other. But the general rules, I think, are probably the same. So ants recognize their neighbors, they fight with their neighbors, they have neighbors that they fight with more and some neighbors that they fight with less. They have alarm pheromones that they put out when somebody's invading their nest. So they're, the basic list of things that you might communicate with if you're an insect are probably pretty similar to if you're a bird.
That's cool. What I'm always fascinated. What are the things that, and maybe it may change from year to year, may be consistent. What are the things that tend to really grab your students' imagination? The topics that you're covering, are the things they react to more excitedly than others?
Yeah, it really changes from one semester to the next. So I teach 3 classes regularly. One is a animal behavior class. I'm teaching that this semester. Some springs I teach an ornithology class. And then I also teach a core level introduction to ecology and evolution class. So the things that catch students' attention depend on what class it is. And sometimes there are more current event type things that are their attention more. I try to predict what's going to catch their attention. I'm not too successful with that. And other times students get really excited about a topic one year, and so I make a bunch of slides on it, and then the next year I give that same material and it seems like they couldn't care less. Not a great answer to your question.
No, it's fascinating for being.
I'm stalling to see if I can come up with something.
That's right. I'm stalling. That's well, on a far more pedestrian level. There are, as we discussed earlier, far more birders in the world than there are ornithologists.
Right.
And are you so petty as to be down amongst us lesser mortals? Do you have a life list?
Oh, I do. Yeah.
Is it a secret number, or will you share it with the class?
Off the top of my head, I actually don't know what it is. For North America, it's somewhere around 585 or something like
Nice.
that.
For those listeners who don't know, birders, the more obsessive ones, keep a list of every bird they've ever seen, where they saw it, and every time they see a new species, they add it to their number. And
Right.
there are how many species currently believed to exist now? What, 6,000 or something, or
Worldwide, it's probably closer to 10,000.
yeah, depending on how you.
North America, probably about 800. But a lot of those are things that don't regularly occur in North America. You have to chase them down when a rare vagrant
Right.
from
When
Europe.
the wind blows them from the Caribbean up into the States.
Right, right. So, I was a bird watcher from when I was a little kid. So I started building that life list early, and
Yep.
It plateaus fast. There are still a lot of North American birds that I would like to see. Most of them are either Rocky Mountain or far northern birds.
Yeah.
And I'll take the trips to see them someday.
Oh yeah. No, it's funny. I got my first, never forget it. I got the National Geographic Guide to Birds of North America when I was, I think, 8 or 9.
Oh, really?
Yeah, really early. I remember that. I remember I was absolutely thrilled when I identified a black-legged kittiwake at the beach, as opposed to just being a seagull.
Right.
And I had like an older cousin mock me for that until I broke out the book and showed him that he was an idiot, for which, of course, I got held underwater for 30 seconds. So there's a feedback loop in every society.
Right.
And as a major dork, one of my biggest thrills was finally, I always wanted to see a stellar jay because it looked so blue. And finally, I was out in Colorado years ago, and I was in a friend's backyard just sitting there, and there it was. I was really thrilled. He's like, "You're a major loser." So that you've got an abundance of ornithological riches here you're paying no attention to. Well, I urge everyone to go get a copy of the book, Bird Talk, An Exploration of Avian Communication by Ballantyne and Hyman. Fascinating read. Is there anything that you would say that people who have not been kind of already bitten by the birding bug, what would prompt them to get into the great outdoors and start enduring mosquitoes to see that rare find?
Well, I think, like you said, I mean, for so many people, there is simply that people refer to it as the spark bird, some bird that caught your attention that you never realized was there before. And in North America, there are a lot of beautiful birds, and sometimes they're small and sometimes they're way up in the trees. But I gave a talk at a local elementary school last semester, and I showed the students pictures of, flamingos and penguins. And I said, do you know this bird? Do you know this bird? And toucans. And then I showed them pictures of these beautiful North American warblers that migrate between Central America and the US every year. And I said, what about this bird? Do you know its name? Do you know where it lives? This bird lives in your backyard. This is a North Carolina bird. They're all in the woods here. You should know this bird. So, I think it just takes a little time to focus and pay attention and to decide you're going to have some appreciation for the natural world around you. I've heard so many stories about people during the pandemic, being in their house and staring at their bird feeder for longer than they ever have before. That was the start of something new for them. And so, something like our book, if it's going to serve a purpose, maybe it's to get people to think a little bit more deeply about the lives of the individuals and not just building your list of species you can see, but appreciating a little bit more about the complexity of the lives of the common things in your backyard, and realizing that they're living animals, living beings that are communicating with each other about all sorts of things that are important to them.
That's a good idea. And your comment about the bird feeder has given me a new hypothesis that I'm going to run by you first before we take it to a broader audience. I think that Anthony Fauci is actually in the bag for big birding.
Could
This
be.
whole thing was to get you to sit still and watch the bird feeder outside your front window.
Well, I think I'm going to have to end this conversation because clearly I've been found out. I'm on my way to my safe house.
So terrible theory. But anyway, it's a delight to catch up, Jeremy. Thanks so much. I hope the book sells enormously. Everyone should go on Amazon and buy it immediately. We'll put the link in the description below. But beyond that, your exposition as to why people should get outside and do some birding. I would just add, what's the worst that's going to happen? You have a nice walk in the woods.
Exactly. There are worse things to do.
There are worse things to do. And there's certainly, I will wrap up, this ties in so nicely with how we end every Messy Times, where we adjure our listenership to turn off the news because they're just lying to you and making you crazy in the Messy Times. And I'm going to change that, turn off the news and get a pair of binoculars and go outside and look for some birds.
Yeah. And learn how to recognize them by song too. That's important.
That's important. Thank you so much.
Sure.